Sounds good.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Higgins, contributing writer to Film and TV Now, and I'm delighted to welcome one and all to this interview special with actor Martin Delaney, who's appearing in two new Sky productions.
Hello.
First up is Rosie Malloy Gives Up Everything, in which she reteamed with Sheridan Smith for the first time in 20 years since Two Pints of Lager and a Packet of Crisps. And then secondly, he also appears in the new alternate Christmas fare, Christmas Carol, opposite Saran Jones, in which he plays American business tycoon Barry Sage. Good morning, Martin, a warm welcome.
Morning, John. Thanks for having me.
I've only seen the trailer, and they look really fun anyway. So just tell us a bit more about these two shows.
Yeah, of course. So, Rosie Malloy Gives Up Everything is started, I think, on Wednesday, the 7th of this month. So it's sort of two episodes in, I think. And it's a show by Susan Nixon, who's a wonderful writer who wrote Two Pints of Lager and a Packet of Crisps as well. And it's essentially about Rosie Malloy, a sort of second generation Irish girl. She's born in London. I'm sorry, born in Manchester, but family are Irish, which is quite like my family really as well. And so Ardal O'Hanlon plays Sheridan's dad, and Pauline McGlynn plays Sheridan's mum, which is a really lovely Father Ted sort of reuniting as well. So that's really cool. But it's basically about Rosie's character, Sheridan's character, is going through some troubles after her brother gets married, and some family stuff, and decides to sort of give up all her vices in the world, and sort of knock her sort of partying days on the head, of which I play one of the vices. I'm one of the bad habits she's trying to give up. So I play Robert Adlington, who's a work colleague and sort of boss, really. And sometime fair weather friend, I guess we could say, of Rosie. It was a lot of fun. A lot of fun. Great team. Hartswood Films as well behind it, and it was just brilliant fun.
And what about A Christmas Carol?
Yeah, I mean, it's Christmas carols. I mean, it's funny, like growing up, watching all these different iterations, I guess, of that story by Dickens on television, and including Muppet Christmas Carol, and all these, and the old Albert Finney film, and then being a fan when I was a kid of Scrooged, in the
Mhm.
'80s, watching Bill
Yeah.
Murray's version. It really reminds me of that that version, in that it's very aware of itself and aware of the narrative, and
Hmm.
it's a modern day interpretation, but it's a brilliant script by Anil Gupta and Richard Pinto, and just sort of quintessentially British. So you might have seen from the trailer that the in Christmas Carol, in the modern version, Saran Jones plays a woman called Carol McKay, who's runs a company building sort of tat at Christmas. So she's responsible for lots of landfill and problems with her kind of cheap plastic products. In the show, the idea is that she's at a point where she's thinking about selling the company, and that'll have an impact as well on her team. And she's visited by three ghosts of British light entertainment. So Morecambe and Wise are the ghosts of Christmas past, and then you've got Joe Brand and Nish Kumar, and it's brilliant fun. It's a real ride. Saran's amazing, and it was a real pleasure to work with her.
Okay.
Um, yeah, good fun. And I play Barry Sage, who's an American who's got his eye on the company, basically.
Okay. Now, your first role was as Jason Summerby in Nickelodeon's first UK teen comedy drama, The
Yeah.
Pemberley Rejects. I mean, when you received that role, how important was it to get that role in your career?
Well, John, I mean, I'd started acting when I was still a teenager at school, like quite young, but really made the decision when I was in that period, and I'd just been lucky. I'd gone to open calls in the West End for musicals, and started in musical theatre. I didn't have any musical theatre training. I mean, my dad and mum didn't really know anything about the entertainment industry. But at school, they were really nurturing. I was quite shy, but a bit cheeky, and they thought, we'll try and get him into some plays. So, I mean, at the time, it was a big deal just because it was my first lead role, regular role in a TV show, even though I'd done guests in other things. Um, and it was the first time Nickelodeon made a British show. You know, we Nickelodeon had Keenan and Kel and Clarissa and all these kind of shows on their channel that were American imports, and they were finally making something British. And it was about a really bad five-a-side football team. And I came from a big footballing family. My brother was a professional footballer. Um, so it was great fun because it was like carrying out um, everything that I'd grown up with. You know, football and acting had sort of come together and was and sort of prominent in our family. And my dad was a huge fan of British comedy and as well as football. So the idea of doing a kind of drama comedy was really really cool. And we ended up working with some players that Jeff Hurst and Gordon Banks and Martin Peters. The '66 team came and did an episode twice with us where they had so much fun. Stan Bowles did an episode with us in the first season, and we became good friends. Actually, my dad and he were good friends before my dad passed away. And it's funny, these players in my dad's era, the people that my dad was watching, and yeah, it was an incredible job and feels kind of like a weird dream, that
Yeah.
we were working on
I mean,
with America.
mentioning those names, I mean, I watched it when regional football was the big thing, the big match in
Yeah,
Birmingham and Hugh Johns, these great classic commentators. I mean, it's an era gone, but now it's cool. Now, the other thing I noticed, I understand you worked on the prequel to Only Fools and Horses, Rockin' Ships. Now,
yeah,
I mean, that to me is like, I mean, Only Fools and Horses is such an iconic show, and of course, when we look at prequels or they do a spin-off series, often the law of diminishing quality or something like that
hmm,
is. So tell us a bit more about your experience on that. I mean, was it, how good was it compared to the iconic series with Dale and Rodney and
yeah.
the adult roles?
Yeah, I guess what was clever about because John Sullivan wrote it. John Sullivan came back and wrote it, and I think what was really smart about it, in my opinion, was that it was a different kind of show, and that was really clever. So it wasn't your half an hour in front of a studio audience sitcom. So it was a sort of feature length or an hour long at least piece when they did the Rock and Chips show, and then they did do more. Um, and it was, look, I mean, for me, I thought the writing was really clever because what it focused on was it was a single camera drama, so it felt a bit more cinematic. Dowie Humphreys is a wonderful comedy director, directed it, and actually I'd worked with him in a sitcom years before with Aid Edmondson called Teenage Kicks. And when he wanted me to come in, he originally wanted me to come in and play an audition for Del Boy, I think. And then he was like, "Oh, you're too old looking." And the thing is that they were all going to be teenagers, um, and so that didn't really work out. And then I remember Tracy Gillam, who's a wonderful casting director and really lovely woman, who actually cast me in Two Pints and Rock and Chips, and worked on Rosie Malloy actually. Gives up everything, and I really trust her, and she just offered me a sort of small part in it. And she said, "Oh, Dowie just said we can make an offer for this part," and it was a guy who was basically a teddy boy kicking off with you'll remember the Jolly Boys outing
Mm,
in Only Fools and Horses,
yeah.
and of course there was always this sort of like narrative going on around about the local crook being on the outing with them, and Nicholas Lyndhurst played him in Rock and Chips, and the whole narrative plays out that obviously Rodney was actually his son, and that's why Rodney and Del are so different. And it was really lovely getting to work with Nicholas on a couple of scenes and quite funny scenes really, where he gets to be quite a tough guy. Um, it was really cool. But I remember when I turned up on set with my beard all shaved off and my hair all quiffed up, Dave was like, "Actually, you do look quite young." Maybe it would have worked. But James Buckley did an amazing job. He played Del Boy in it, and he's a lovely lad. And actually, we talked a fair bit about Renford Rejects as well, which was quite fun.
Okay. So obviously you've done quite a lot in film television. I mean, I was interested to learn that you've worked in Hollywood. I mean, with Clint Eastwood and Catherine Bigelow on the likes of Flags of Our Fathers and Zero Dark 30. Those are the other two credits. Tell us a bit more about your experience working with them because they are big names. I mean, they are
Yeah.
Oscar-winning talents. So I'm just curious to know what was your experience in Hollywood like?
Yeah, I mean, and it really, these projects I made in Europe actually, but with these guys. But so I've been over in LA a fair bit over the years, but what happened is I did a Viking film in Iceland about in 2004, a sort of epic reworking of Beowulf, and I was in that playing one of the sort of warriors with Jared Butler and Stellan Skarsgård and Sarah Polly, and I met a bunch of these Icelandic team, and friends of mine who worked in casting there were saying, "Oh, Clint Eastwood's coming over to make a movie in the summer." And so I just went in and taped for a really like kind of small part, which I wasn't really used to doing, like tiny parts at that point. But I remember thinking I really would love to work with him, and I came in and he was at my meeting, and so which was really shocking. Um, but I ended up playing like a very small part with very little left in the movie, but it was an American role, and he's an incredible director, very, very calm atmosphere at work, a very charming, articulate director, but actually really leaves a lot up to the actor, the performer. Um, and there's been lots of stories going on. Tom Hanks was recently talking about his experience working with him and how Clint sort of says, whenever you're ready, sort of thing. It doesn't really say action. It is the most chilled out set I've ever been on. It's very calm. And that can be quite daunting as an actor because you want feedback. You want to know if you're doing a good job. But Catherine as well, I worked with Clint Eastwood in Iceland, but then a few years later, in 2012, I did Zero Dark 30, which was a very secretive project. We weren't allowed to know much about it. And I remember that I'd auditioned, and I was also up for a film with Roland Joffe, who I really admired because I really admired The Killing Fields and The Mission, and was a big fan of his work. And it got to that point, those horrible moments where you had to make a decision about what film you were going to do because they clashed. It's the typical actor's journey, right? You're sitting sort of on your hands for a while, and then jobs come along like buses, and you've got to like somehow decide between a person you really admire and another person you really admire. I ended up doing Zero Dark 30 over here, and I was lucky enough to have scenes with Mark Strong and Stephen Delane, and again, I mean, Catherine is incredibly I remember the first day that I came onto set, and again, really a very small part, playing a assistant to the sort of national security advisor, and the national security advisor was Stephen Delane, and I got onto set, and she walked me around the crew and was like introducing me to everyone. This is Martin, and just very she's very confidence inducing because again, she gives you a lot of space and time to do your thing and offer what you offer, and her notes tend to be quite technical and quite just really concise, and that helps you to trust the director and the work they're doing. And I was really lucky enough back in 2019 to work with George Clooney as well on Catch 22, his series for Paramount. They're just all George is like he really is the most charming and brilliant director. I really didn't get a chance to talk to him about how much I love Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, and he gives a lot of himself. We had quite a lot of time together, and including when my wife came out, he was great with Emerald, and Amal was out there at the same time actually, and yeah, he's an incredibly generous man of his time and his effort, and just a lovely director. Very just knows exactly what he wants, and it's really encouraging. So it's easy to work that way, but he still gives you the freedom to find some humor in it as well. And Catch 22 being the type of drama that it is.
Mm-hmm.
Luke Davis and David Michaud's script was just fantastic, and we were able to find some nuanced humor in it as well,
Mm-hmm.
being that kind of black comedy style. But it was a lot of fun, and I feel very privileged and lucky to work with these guys. John M. Chu as well, who's another wonderful director I worked with on Now You See Me Too. Just the most amazing. He did Crazy Rich Asians recently, and he's just most amazing director. I just
Mm-hmm.
feel such so honored that they trust me playing an American for them.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean it's fascinating to learn about your experiences. I've heard Clint Eastwood the reason why he doesn't say action is simply because he got really annoyed years ago from a read of assistant directors yelling action. In reality, it used to spook horses. So that's what I learned
Yeah,
apparently from. But also he's a very quick director. So let's move on. I
yeah.
mean, want to talk a little bit about you've appeared. You mentioned Catch 22, but I understand you've appeared in some really significant contenders for awards like The Shadow Line and The Promise. I mean, just in terms of where you are now with your career, I mean, how do you curate your career choices into your path, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I think any actor really, if they're honest, is you work really, really hard, and you try and work really hard in certain areas, but there is obviously a lot of luck involved in what you're doing, and I think if you take Zero Dark Thirty as an example, we weren't allowed to read the script, and it was similar for the big stars that were taking part in that project. I remember Mark Strong even saying to me, I was just told that I'd be in the film for 15, 20 minutes, and this is what Catherine wanted, and so sometimes you can really pick and choose about what you would like to do next. Other times you think I'd really like to work with that producer and that director. It's really and the role seems interesting even if it's not very big, and really the Shadowline and The Promise really fall under that camp. I mean, they're great shows. They were sort of standalone dramas in the way that Catch 22 was, limited dramas. They weren't the sort of thing that was going after churning out series after series. But I really loved Hugo Blick's work, and it's the same with Peter Kuzminski. I really thought they're incredible directors, and if I can have the opportunity to work with them in this way, I'd love to. I want to. So I remember meeting. I think Doreen Jones was casting The Shadow Line, and it was a producer that I'd worked with years ago in Family Affairs that was producing it, and I was like, oh great, there's some people that I really know, and I was just really. I didn't know. I remember thinking the part was very small, but with The Shadow Line, I was in a few episodes, but sort of dotted around and didn't have a lot to do. But I remember meeting Doreen Jones, who's since passed away, wonderful casting director. And I think this is kind of missing a little bit from our industry now, but she knew a lot of my work. So when I sat down in the meeting in front of the team, she was saying to me things like, Martin, I really loved when you were in Robin Hood playing that guy. I really, and started to really like flesh it out and talk about it. And I remember thinking, that's not someone who's just seen my show reel. Like she knew a lot about that episode and knew a lot about the character that I was playing. And, and equally, when she was talking about the part, she said, like I know it's not a big thing, but we really want this to feel like, because Tobias Menzies was my boss in it, and we were working as journalists. And she said, I want this guy to feel like the Tobias of the future, and that kind of he's got a little bit of that sort of vibe about him. He's the next guy that's going to come in, and she just had a way of charming you and making you think, okay, maybe this is a really interesting project to do and worth doing. I mean, Hugo again, as I say, brilliant director, and I'm really pleased that I got to work with all the guys that I did in that show. And it's the same with Peter's show, The Promise. I remember thinking the subject matter was important, and just loving his work, um, and the opportunity to go to Israel and film and do a little bit in that. I thought it was absolutely worth it, and yeah, real pleasure, real pleasure.
Hmm. So obviously, let's talk about one of your upcoming projects. I mean, you may be able to reveal what it's all about, but you're due to appear as Rob Ryan in the new biopic drama The King of, directed by
Yeah,
Emil Ben Shimon, which
yeah. I
chronicles the
mean,
forming of the Silicon Valley company SM, which, from what I gather, it saved the internet from extinction in the 1990s. I
yeah.
mean, tell us a bit more about this, and I mean, when can we see it?
Yeah, so I mean, at the moment, I think the film is well into its edit, and it's almost picture locked, and so they're moving quite fast. We shot it in the summer, but yeah, The King of is as you say, it's a biopic about Rob Ryan, who's a guy that really no one's heard of, like in the way that we've heard of, Steve Jobs and Tim Cook and all these guys and Elon Musk, and yet really it's had the arguably the biggest impact on the world that we're in today. He didn't create the internet. He's not the man who created the internet. But at the time when the internet was only being used really by the military and emails were starting to be used by businesses, um, and a few things were propping up the internet. There was uh, there was a point when it was going to become a fad, and there was a concern that it was going to go bust because internet service providers, for example, couldn't keep up with the demand of customer, and it was actually more expensive for them to have the customer on board. They were losing money, but all the while hoping that AT&T or one of those big Cisco or one of those big firms were going to create products that made it simpler for them, and it just wasn't happening. And Rob Ryan was an engineer. He's still around. He's retired, and he's a great guy. I was lucky enough to get to know him in making the film. But he was an engineer at a couple of different companies in Silicon Valley, but he was a New Yorker, and ended up becoming Engineer of the Year at Intel and winning a couple of prestigious awards at the time, and creating what they call the Blue Book, which is the rule book really of the Ethernet, and it's still used as the sort of internal communication rule book. So Rob decided to, after a number of attempts at looking at communications with his team, including video conferencing like we're looking at now, he was one of the first guys to create it in business. He realized that there was a house of cards basically in internet service providers, and it was all going to tumble down unless someone got in and shifted it. And so he created a product that was eventually called the Pizza Box, which is basically a flat modem that instead of serving 10 calls, could serve 96 calls all at once. So people weren't just going to get busy signals, and that would mean the internet service providers could keep going. So it's not, I mean, that element isn't very sexy, but the fact that he actually switched what was going on in our society. Ascend as a company, I think, sold for 28 billion in 94. Now with inflation, that's certainly more than Elon Musk has paid for Twitter. It's still one of the biggest, if not the biggest, tech acquisitions ever. But really no one knows Rob's story. So it was an honor to really tell a version of his story, because you've got his real life and you've got the dramatic narrative, but certainly a version of what went on for him as a New Yorker in Silicon Valley trying to make headway. And it's a sort of story of Icarus, flying a bit close to the sun. And it's a really fascinating story, and I hope everyone enjoys it. We had a wonderful cast and a wonderful time.
Okay. Well, listen, we're going to wrap this up in a moment, but I just want to ask you one last question, which is,
sure,
with everything you've achieved over the years, I mean, you are now you've got a great profile, and you seem to be well minded and well intentioned with what you do in your career. I mean, what are you most proud of at the moment, to date, I should say?
Gosh, I mean, that's a hard one. I think there's jobs that you really enjoy, that you really enjoy the experience, even though it might be a bit of a crazy shoot and you work with some really good people. I'm really proud of getting to work with directors in our industry that maybe felt like it was unachievable as a young Brit coming from a working class background. I'm really proud of playing Rob in The King of, just because it's a lead role in an independent film, an American independent film, and to play someone as interesting as that, to someone who is essentially, again, from a working class Irish family like myself in New York, who's had this sort of ambition for greatness, certainly in Rob's case, and I share about that too. Like I want to be the best that I can be in whatever I'm doing, but he really went for it in a way that was so Route One and brave, that was really amazing to explore. That once he knew what he wanted, I guess he sort of wasn't able to be nudged off the pedestal by other bigger bullies. So it was a real honor being able to bring that part of Rob's narrative to life and play that, and work with a great team, including the director that you mentioned, Emil Ben Shimon, is just the most wonderful Israeli director with some beautiful Israeli films, and it's his first British language film. So I'm really honored to work with him in that capacity.
Okay, well, listen, Martin, thank you so much for your time and insights today. It's been a pleasure chatting with you about everything you do. I mean, well done, and congratulations. Merry Christmas as well.
Thank you,
Just to
John.
wrap up, Rosie Malloy Gives Up Everything can be seen on Sky Comedy, and Christmas Carol can be seen on Sky Max. So please do check out these programs as and when you get a chance. Of course, do check out Flags of Our Fathers and Zero Dark 30. Really great, important movies. Certainly the last one, because it chronicles the hunt for Osama bin Laden. And do keep your eyes open for release dates of The King of, which is what Martin says is currently in the edit. You can watch a replay of this interview on my YouTube channel, John Higgins Film Review. And for more interviews and articles, you can see my my portfolio and everything on the website, www.filmandtvnow.com. So once again, thank you very much, Martin.
It's a pleasure, John. Thanks so much. Happy Christmas.
Cheers.